This is hard to understand for most people because they want a clear motive, they want to know why, and thrill killers kill for the excitement of it, and they enjoy the planning of it.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we're all just trying to survive in a rough world.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, where we promise to deliver the best guests in all of true crime. Now, it's been 2 months and 3 days since 4 young University of Idaho students were savagely murdered, stabbed to death in their off-campus home in Moscow. Let's take a moment to never forget those lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogen, 21, Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20. May their memories all be a blessing. Police say that the killer is 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger. We want to remind everyone that Bryan Coburger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Our best guests today are here in full force in the magenta/pink is Amy Schultzberg. She has a master's degree in forensic psychology and a Ph.D., therefore a doctor in criminal justice. She is currently department chair and an associate professor of criminology at Fairleigh Dickinson University in the great state of New Jersey, where I hail from, and so do they. Megan Sachs is a full professor of criminology and the graduate program director at Fairleigh Dickinson University and teaches classes including women and crime, serial killers, and crime policy. Amy and Megan co-host not one, but 2 podcasts, Women and Crime and Direct Appeal. So check it out. And we are going to jump into this right away. They had both been covering this case from the get-go. Megan, I believe, lives actually close to the jail that Coburger was at. Why don't you set the scene? What was it like? I know you passed by at the time he was apprehended.
Yeah, Joel, thank you. I did. It was shocking to learn not only that the suspect was studying for his Ph.D. in criminology and criminal justice, which I can relate to, but then to find out that he's apprehended, in my county and he's in a jail that is just minutes from my house. That was also doubly shocking. And so I did go over to the jail to see, I just felt compelled to go and see what was happening. At the time, there were a couple of news trucks, I would say there. CNN was there, but it wasn't media swarming around. I did notice, however, much not something that I appreciated, I will say, that there was a car of 4 people, and they looked, to be young, but they came, they jumped out, they were smiling, taking selfies in front of the jail. And so, that kind of thing, I guess is bound to happen, but wasn't such a welcome sight at the time, I would say.
And that leads us directly into the next question. And Amy, I'm going to throw this one to you. There's sort of a morbid fascination. And if we're being completely honest, I host a true crime podcast. People are really interested for different sorts of reasons, I think. I find it compelling. I know myself from a psychological standpoint. My mother, who sometimes co-hosts, is a social worker. My father's a retired psychiatrist. So I'm very intrigued by the psychology of the mind of a killer, as well as victimology. But I'm curious, why do you think, and then we'll get Megan's take, about why people are so fascinated by true crime in general, and specifically this case?
This question has come up a lot because true crime is so popular at this time. And there's a lot of different theories that can help us understand the fascination with true crime. I think, for one, people have always been fascinated with the unknown and just fascinated with things that seem, foreign to them and things that scare them. I think, quite frankly, people like to be scared. I think for women, it might be a little different. I think women, in a way, take lessons from true crime and feel that they learn how to best protect themselves, or they feel as if they're somehow more in control of their destiny and whether or not they will become a crime victim. Because as you're watching, you're learning, and you also are realizing that, that victim did nothing, and crime is random sometimes. And I think people somehow feel more of a sense of control. I think this case in particular, just the senseless nature, how brutal it was, seemingly, out of nowhere, no motive at the beginning. It just seemed like there was no answer. And of course, anytime there's a quadruple homicide of young people, it's going to grab the attention. And I think just the nature of having no idea who could have done such a thing, there was no pop out suspect from the beginning. I think that's something that really fascinated people about this case.
Megan, anything
Yeah.
you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Amy. There are so many reasons why people are interested and fascinated by true crime. Look, human behavior, it's interesting, right? I think it's okay to be interested in crime and theory and figuring out why people do the things they do, as long as it's done, in a respectful manner and true to being respectful to victims. I think that we like sleuthing. People like a mystery, the unknown, as Amy was saying, and the ability to maybe solve it. I think people want to know why, what differentiates them from someone else who might fall victim to a crime. I think true crime allows people to explore the dark side and things that they don't really understand from a very safe place and without having to be directly involved. And I think actually it makes people feel safer when they do understand why the crime occurred and when it's solved and when, they can say, okay, maybe that wouldn't happen to me, or now I know why that couldn't happen to me. Now with this case in particular, I think that's different. I think in this instance, the crime, for the reasons Amy said as well, is fascinated us, but I think it's because of, the unknown. There's no apparent motive here, and I will discuss that, briefly in a minute. And there is the unknown factor here. So why would something like this happen? You see, I think we can understand, even if we don't condone it, we understand crime that is utilitarian. Like when I say utilitarian, it serves a purpose. Now, the purpose may be a financial one. It may be revenge. Everyone has a different purpose. But at least for those, we go, okay, we get why that happened. In this instance, we don't understand. What could this serve? What utility does this crime have? And I think people also want to know what makes someone who seems kind of ordinary in their everyday life commit such an extraordinary act. And I don't mean that in the positive way. How does someone step over those lines? What drives them to do these things? So I think that's
Megan,
also the fascination with this case.
To
And
your
I'm sorry.
point, it-
Sorry, one final thought there. What I was saying before is that fascination with true crime, I think people do feel safe from the comfort of their home, and they feel safe when they have an explanation. And I think this crime had the exact opposite effect, where people felt unsafe. I can tell you for myself, I've been locking my doors more. I've been checking them frequently. And I'm certain it's because of this crime and just knowing about it and, having that vulnerability or feeling. And I think that's what people are experiencing.
and I agree with that 100%. I've felt a little like weirded out myself, and just it goes to show you, this happened in a little town in Moscow, Idaho, and he was discovered not far from where you live. So
Right.
evil does lurk out there, but I don't want to keep everyone hanging on the edge of their seats, even though that would be good TV. So to your point, what is your take on motive here? That is, why is still the $64 million question.
It's the biggest question, I think, in this case. Why and how did he choose these victims? It is still early for motive, but it's still very early, actually, to determine or to speak, with confidence about motive. But I think one thing that I haven't heard very much discussion about that came to my mind, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some discussion or exploration of Coburger, or if he's, the person who did this, as this would be a thrill killing. So, thrill killers, this is hard to understand for most people because they want a clear motive. They want to know why. And thrill killers kill for the excitement of it. And they enjoy the planning of it. They enjoy the stalking ahead of time, which is something that happened, it seems might have happened in this case. It is an excitement. There's a lead up. They often pick people who are strangers to them. The motive is often not sexual, and it is for some type of excitement. And there are other people who absolutely, we know, I could give you an example. The ultimate thrill killer is probably Zodiac Killer. If you recall, Zodiac Killer sought out random people, probably not random in his selection of them, but he killed them. He then wrote letters talking about how much fun it was to kill someone. It was the excitement. It gave him a satisfaction. And so in that way, it's, very senseless. I'm not saying that's definitely the case here. Again, I think it's early, but I just want to put that in the ring as a suggestion because I think that it's possible that there's going to be some findings along those lines.
And Amy, do you agree with that assessment? Do you differ at all?
Yeah, I definitely think there was an element of control. I tend to lean more towards that he perhaps knew one or more of the victims. Maybe not. Maybe they didn't know him, but he knew them, meaning he may have seen one of them. Maybe he only saw them just passing by the house once and looking in, and someone caught his eye for whatever reason. And I don't think there necessarily was a sexual motivation, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they found DNA evidence. I know the timeline is very tight, but we've covered many cases where somebody was brutally killed and there was no evidence of sexual assault on the victims, but then in the area, you found that, the offender actually did get off sexually after he committed the crime. And I think that's a possibility here as well.
Since you both live in this world, teach this, do you find yourselves being, do you think you're more aware situationally than most other women, Amy?
Yes, I don't think I trust many people because of that, but in a healthy way, I'd say it's made me very aware of the random nature of crime. We study victimology, and we do know that, when people are when they're victimized, it's not always random. There are theories that can help us understand, but there are also cases where people are, as Megan pointed out, people are randomly targeted. So I as much as I can prepare or try to protect myself or my loved ones, I'm also very much aware of the fact that there's only so much you could do, unfortunately.
Megan, how about you?
I don't think the victims in the Idaho case were randomly targeted. I agree with you, Amy. I think that if Coburger is the suspect, he or is the person who committed the crimes, I do think he knew them somehow. I don't think they knew him, and I don't think they were, having any type of relationship. But yeah, certainly I would agree with that. Being in this field makes me a lot more aware. Yes. I am one of those person who will walk with my keys in my hands. If I walk into a small store, let's say, and it's evening and I think there's, only a couple of people in there and me, I assess like right away. But I was also a federal probation officer. So some of that comes from that training and that as well. When I used to go into a home, you have to assess everything right away. But I think about what's the exit strategy? How do I get out of here? If someone comes at me, these things really, I do think about these things probably on a more regular basis than someone who maybe doesn't work in this field, for sure.
I'll tell you, I covered general news, politics, which can almost be as scary. But now that I'm focused on this exclusively, I definitely have a heightened sense of awareness. So Coburger is due back in court on January 12th, which is Thursday, 8:30 in the morning. There's been very little news because people are awaiting that court hearing. But there was actually an interview with a woman who claimed she had a Tinder date with Bryan Kohberger. They met, they swiped. I'm post-Tinder, so I apologize. Did never experience that. I guess they clicked. They went to a movie, and then he basically didn't force his way in, but kind of was very pushy. And her quote is, he's like, I'm not, and I'm like, you are, meaning like being pushy. You are, though. And he's like, I'm not touching you. This woman saying that he was, meaning Coburger, was kind of trying to gaslight me into thinking that he didn't touch me, which is weird. She described him as a stage 5 clinger, which those are what my kids are as well.
Right.
Just curious, Amy, Does any of this surprise you, assuming that this account is real and true and genuine?
No, I also wouldn't put much stock into that. I don't know this individual and I don't know what their motives are, but I can tell you many cases where you have people coming out of all sorts of corners saying that they know the individual. And, in hindsight, I can tell you in hindsight, I can probably say, oh yeah, that person did seem a little strange, but we can do that with anyone. So I think anyone who had any Tinder date and that person was the suspect in a quadruple murder, anyone would say, oh yeah, well, looking back, this was kind of weird. So I don't know how much stock I put in that. I'm trying in this case in particular, and really any case, only really look at the news that comes from very credible sources, because there's been way too many rumors from the start with this case. And I think it's pretty horrible what the media is doing to some of their surviving victims. And I'm trying to stay away from all of that, but it does not surprise me.
Then there's also a little bit of news. There was some video released. It is not 100% corroborated or confirmed, but it is believed to be the white Elantra passing by the morning after the killings. So, Megan, to you, would it be any surprise to know that Bryan Coburger was coming back to see his handiwork? We already know that digital forensics tie him to the crime scene roughly around the same time.
No, it would not be a surprise. It's counterintuitive, though. You think, wow, this person would want to be as far away from this scene as possible. Now, there's a couple different reasons here, though. I would say there's three primary reasons why he might have returned there. One of them is, yes, to observe the handiwork, to revel in it, to see how it all plays out. So just to witness that, I think, is definitely one possibility. The other two possibilities are that he wanted to find out if he left anything behind. Like all of a sudden he realizes, oh my goodness, that knife sheath is gone. Can I get back and check out the area and scan and see if there's anything, that I could possibly collect, something I might left behind. And then the third reason is just what I had said. Amy and I think we had a discussion about this, but there's a generalized anxiety, and he probably felt like he needed to see, were the police there yet? How big was this thing? Was there media coverage there? So it could either be for excitement or reliving it, or it could be because he was genuinely panicking. So I think those are the three options that we have.
Well, especially with that sheath left at the scene, right? He was probably like, uh-oh, better get back there. Amy, to you, there's been a lot of talk about this. Do you think it was his first violent crime? Someone wrote to me that there is an unsolved homicide, I think within a 20-mile radius of Bryan Coburger's Pennsylvania home, and I believe that woman was stabbed to death. What do you think when it comes to, was this his inaugural murder, or do you think he had done it before?
I would imagine that this is his first violent crime. I would expect that he had a lot of online behaviors that were considered illegal, and maybe some stalking behaviors. And I'm just not sure that there's been an actual violent crime yet, because I think, frankly, he made too many mistakes. It was clear, or it seems clear, that this was this offender's first time. By leaving, the knife sheath, although it is possible it was left on purpose. You can't ignore that possibility. But even with bringing the cell phone, turning it off, and then putting it back on, and driving your same car that you commit the crime, it seems like a lot of very sloppy mistakes for somebody who is a seasoned offender. And also, he is pretty young. Most people do start offending 16 to 18 is where we see most crime peaking. But when we're talking about violent crime, such as a quadruple homicide, it tracks that this would be his first violent crime in his, mid to late 20s. So I don't think Megan, you agree with that? I think we talked about this before.
Yeah, I agree. While we certainly can't be certain, and look, would it come as some huge shock if we found out he committed another crime? I don't know, but I can say I don't think that that he's done this before. I agree with Amy. I think we're going to see stalking and other petty crimes, a buildup, kind of dipping his toe in the pond. but I think that this is probably his first violent expression of crime. And I think, for the reasons Amy said as well, there were just a lot of mistakes that he made. And I would think if he had committed a crime, a violent crime, a murder before, he would have learned a little bit more from those mistakes, maybe, refined himself, refined his methods, the way he approached a crime scene. So I do tend to think that this was his first violent crime as well.
And what's so interesting about having the two of you as guests is you are professors in this field. He was studying this. Amy, are you going to look at your students more closely now?
No, but I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of people were fixated on that. And people were quick to say, oh, he was studying, he went into this field so he could learn how to be the best criminal he could be. In criminology, you don't learn how to commit crimes. We're studying, criminology is very different than other parts of, there's criminal justice, there's forensic psychology, cybersecurity, there's all sorts of different things you could study. But in criminology, we're really focused on why people commit crimes and understanding, policies that can help, prevent crimes. So I'm probably not going to look at my students any different, but I will tell you, I was surprised. A lot of my students did not even know the story for the first couple of weeks, because, students, I assumed criminology students would be, all over this kind of case, but they simply hadn't heard of it until I brought it up and it was at the end of the semester. So
they should get Jersey Fs for that. Tell them. If they don't know what's going on in the news, they can't be in the classroom. Megan, to you, I understand that there have been other killers who either were law students or studying something related to the field. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, the first comparison I've heard lots of people making is to Ted Bundy, and for, I think, obvious reasons, right? Ted Bundy had majored in psychology and then was a law student. He was, highly educated, and he went on to become one of the most infamous serial killers known in the United States, right? So I think I understand why they're making comparisons, and certainly there's, I'm trying to think, I know there was also a serial killer in England. I think it was about 2010, Stephen Griffiths, I think his name was. And he also was a criminology student who went on to become a serial killer. So I think, we're interested. Remember, I said before, it's okay to be interested in human behavior. It's okay to be interested in crime and criminal justice news and topics. So obviously, Amy and I were both very interested in this topic, right? I've been interested from a young age. It's, I guess, what you do with it, right? So I gravitated toward this field because I'm interested in it. I want to study. I want to help explain this behavior. I want to be a small part of making, better changes in the system. So, I've kind of found a positive way to contribute, but I think it's also possible that, people are attracted to criminology and the study of crime, and they, take that and they do something terrible with it instead. Such as, some of these students who then went on, to commit these awful crimes after having, studied the topic more.
So digging into this probable cause affidavit, I just want to say one thing. With this podcast, I've acquired many mothers in a way, because I get yelled at by people every day, not just my mom now. So viewers write in. One person was exceptionally upset with me that I used the full name. And I just want to say that I should not have. It is in the probable cause affidavit. I'm talking about one of the surviving roommates. So I will just use her initials, and I sincerely apologize for that, because I don't want to make it any more difficult on these victims, surviving victims, than it already is. And it's going to be a lifetime of pain, unfortunately. I just interviewed BTK's daughter, and she is still suffering many years later, and I think will unfortunately continue to. But with that said, DM is one of the surviving roommates, and in the affidavit, she describes the suspect. Says he has like bushy eyebrows. I'm curious, Amy, from your perspective, because unfortunately she's taking a lot of criticism online. Well, how could you run in your room? How could you lock the door? And I just want to underscore here that we are victims advocates on the show. No one should be skewering her. But I'm curious about your response as a professor in the field.
I too, as I mentioned before, I'm very upset with the way the media is treating that particular survivor because she's being harassed. I think that I don't think anyone has any right to try to speculate what she was thinking or how she reacted. But in general, it is very well studied and known that people respond to trauma in different ways. And I don't think it is fair for anybody to critique the way an individual acts in a situation like that. I think there are many possibilities. I think it is possible that, she froze with fear, as she says, it's similar to she says something similar to that in the affidavit. But, I think she could have passed out from fear or from being intoxicated. It's unknown what was going on. We don't know this woman. We don't know her history. We don't know, she could be suffering from PTSD. She could have different responses to trauma. Regardless, I think people need to leave her alone and, let the police talk to her and let her help them however she can and let her heal because she has a tough road ahead of her, I'm sure. And I'm sure she's dealing with some survivor's guilt as well.
100%.
Oh, I'm sure.
Megan, to you, what did the affidavit?
I'm sorry. Can I add one thing? Would you mind if I added one thing
Go
to what
100%.
Amy was saying before? I just wanted to add the final thought that she was able to give a pretty good eyewitness account to the police, which was really instrumental and will be a key piece of evidence. And as Amy knows, because Amy studies eyewitness identifications as part of her work in wrongful convictions, it's really hard to be a good eyewitness, especially when you are absolutely petrified. So, to her credit, I just want to say, well done on giving police a really helpful tool in apprehending the suspect and helping to build evidence in this case.
That's a great point. The affidavit, what did it say to you about the locations of the roommates?
Well, I guess the affidavit revealed that their location was different. Actually, I think Amy can speak better to this one because this is an area that you were interested in, Amy. Do you want to take this?
Yeah, I found it really interesting and very strategic that initially the police said that two of the two surviving roommates were actually in the bottom floor of the home. And it wasn't known until the affidavit that not only was that not true and one of the roommates was on a higher floor, she actually came face to face with the offender. And I just really applaud the police for doing this because it seems to me that the reason they did this was to protect DM's safety because perhaps the offender did not realize that she even saw him. It is possible. Everyone assumes that just because she saw him that he saw her. But it's possible he was in a different state of mind and he could have looked at her, but looked right through her. And maybe he didn't even realize that there was anyone left, surviving in that house. So I think the location of where everyone was is a very interesting development that we learned. And I think it's one of the more interesting things that came out of the affidavit.
If you I was picturing that when you were describing it. It's a great point that maybe he didn't see her, but if you take 3 seconds to just close your eyes and put yourself in that situation, that is really haunting. And what she's going to deal with is it's immeasurable when you think about it. So from the bottom of our hearts, I wish her the best. In terms of strategic and police strategy, Megan, to you, I think both of you think that law enforcement acted rather quickly. For a while, the Moscow PD was taking some heat as being some amateurish, small town, police force, but it turned out that they're far from that.
Right. Yeah, no, they've done a really good job here. I think people were scared and understandably so. And you want something to happen right away. You want this offender to be caught right away because it's so terrifying that someone is out there that is like him. And could there be a next victim? However, the police were onto him pretty quickly, the suspect in this case, and they had been doing a lot behind the scenes in a reasonable, very quick amount of time to build evidence against him. So they're collecting DNA, they're matching DNA to family members, They're gathering surveillance, taking eyewitness accounts, running, phone records and matching those records. So there's a lot of work that had to be done. And, the affidavit is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just what they needed to submit to get the probable cause. But, they're still holding some cards, close to the vest. And I think that what they did reveal already was a job well done and in a very quick amount of time, given the amount of evidence and the nature of the crimes.
And also, if I
Amy,
could, oh,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there's some. I think you think some strategic moves on the part of law enforcement, particularly about the car and releasing that information. Can you expand on that and what your thoughts are related to that?
Sure. And just to follow up with what Megan was saying, I also think it's important for people who are not in this area or who maybe don't have the knowledge of law enforcement and the way it works. It's very, very important that they were able to establish probable cause. If they were to arrest this suspect too quickly, they could have blown the whole case. And there's procedural rules that police have to follow. So I think, first of all, I don't think they took their time, but to people that think that they took a little long, I don't agree with that at all. And I think I'm glad they did, because they have a pretty strong case. And as Megan said, we don't even know the half of it. And as far as the car goes, I think it's interesting that they had I think they clearly had the information about that car much earlier than they released. So at the time where they finally released that they were looking for this Elantra, it is my understanding that they had already tied Coburger to a white Elantra. So I'm wondering if they were trying to see what his move would be, because I believe they were already surveilling him. And I think it probably surprised everyone that he did not try to get rid of the car. Although he did change the plates, he continued driving the car. And I'm not sure if he thought changing the plates was enough, but clearly it wasn't. And yeah, I think everyone was surprised that he kept the car and then drove it across country.
Do you think those stops in Indiana were coincidental? The FBI says that they had nothing to do with it publicly, but it seems odd.
I don't know. I think that if I was the FBI, I probably wouldn't want to tell the public that those stops were made on purpose, because that's showing some of their strategy in these types of cases. So I think it may have leaked. And honestly, if they didn't plan to do it, then that is a hell of a coincidence. I'm not sure what information they really gleaned from it, but, I'm not sure that there was a lot of rumors about, him having a cut on his hand, whatever else. But I'm not sure what the purpose was, but I'm glad they did it, because it really, they were on him the whole time. So.
And Amy, back to you for a second. So Megan kind of talked about her interest, but I'm curious what got you interested in this field of criminal justice and criminology?
It's funny, Megan, we get this question a lot. Megan has an exact point that she always references, and I'm a little more, I've always just been interested in social justice and fairness and equity. And I was in the mental health field for several years, and then I was working with substance abuse and addiction. And then I just realized how all of this is really connected to the criminal justice system. And, once I learned about wrongful convictions, that was it for me.
We talked about the court date. It is Thursday, January 12th, 8:30 in the morning. Megan, to you, does he plead?
Is he going to enter a plea, you mean? Or is he going to plead guilty later?
That's what I meant to say, yeah. And I don't mean necessarily, obviously, in this hearing, but do you think he will plead guilty in this case?
There's a really interesting question here. He came out strong in the beginning with a statement from a lawyer saying he was really looking forward to getting back and exonerating himself. Interesting wording too. So I study a lot about plea bargaining, and I don't know if people know the numbers on it, but the number of people who plea bargain, or the percent of cases that are plea bargain, is between 95 and 97% of all criminal cases. So, the idea of the trial is kind of just the Law and Order way to look at it, what you see on TV, but it's obviously much more geared towards plea bargaining. Now, he seems like at the start here, he's going to fight. Right now, I think that is I would assume that is his position. It seems like his position. However, I will tell you that he's, newly incarcerated. And he is also, he hasn't felt really the pains of long-term jailing yet, the liberty loss. And also, perhaps he's got a death penalty case here. And so I would think that would motivate him a little bit, but it's hard to predict if he's going to plead guilty or not, because he started off from such a place of, I'm innocent, or not I'm innocent, but I'm going to be exonerated. And I wonder if he's going to stick to that position as the evidence against him comes out and as he realizes, how much there is. I think once the volume of the evidence comes out, he's going to be considering it.
And Amy, to Megan's point, she brought it up. The attorney said my client will be exonerated, and there is a difference. It's minute or not so minute between exoneration and innocence. Can you expound on that and maybe what the defense attorney was? What was at play there?
So exonerated could be based on actual innocence, also known as factual innocence, or there could be a procedural error. So I thought that was an interesting choice of words and somewhat implied that they believe that this case could be overturned based on a procedural error. Or perhaps they just use that word for whatever reason. But of course, innocence and exoneration are not the same thing. Being exonerated is being officially cleared of charges against you. Being innocent means that you did not do something, right? So they are quite different. So it's an interesting choice of words, and I wonder if it was purposeful. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I also got yelled at by someone for looking at my phone. When I'm doing that, I'm looking at information. I'm not texting. I promise you.
Figured.
I'm looking stuff up for the next segment of the show. So, Megan, to you, there's a term that some people are familiar with, others are not, and that is confirmation bias. And at the beginning, we kept hearing about the former boyfriend or the on-again, off-again boyfriend, about the so-called hoodie guy. Can you talk a little bit about confirmation bias and why you think it happened in this particular case?
I can. This is actually Amy's area of specialty, so I will
Amy,
let
do you
her
wanna
add
talk
to
about
it. And
Yeah,
she
Megan,
can.
you could start. Go ahead, Megan, you start.
I would just say that when it comes to confirmation bias, there is a tendency to interpret. There's a tendency to interpret the events. Amy, the tendency to interpret the events in. You finish it off.
Yeah, so it's basically once you believe, it's like having tunnel vision. Once you believe that someone is responsible, you will only process information that confirms that belief. And any information that might lead you to a different suspect, you're going to ignore. So in this case, and I fell victim to it. I was telling Megan, as someone who considers myself educated in this area, when I was reading all of this information about the boyfriend and the hoodie guy and all these other people that were being looked at, you start looking at the evidence different. I would look at a video from the food truck, and all of a sudden, once it gets in my ear that this hoodie guy was shady, you look at the video and all of a sudden you see it different. And I realized if I could fall prey to that as someone who's consciously aware of that mechanism, because for most people it's unconscious. I mean, it's unconscious for me as well, but at least I can catch myself. It really worried me. That's how people get wrongfully convicted all the time, because it starts with this tunnel vision. You think it's one individual and you have blinders on to all evidence to the contrary.
And then you interpret all their behaviors in light of that information. That's what I was stumbling on before.
Yes.
Sorry, what I meant to say. But I think that's the problem is you interpret everything. Oh, yeah, that did seem like a bad thing he did. Oh, he did look a little suspicious,
Yep.
And Amy did tell me that happened a little bit as well. But as I pointed out, and as Amy knows, it's an unconscious process. Not unconscious, it's a subconscious. It's not a conscious process. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But it was unfortunate in this case.
Yeah, you start to really see things through a prism of guilt. And everything.
I mean, a lot of people, Joel, a lot of people did look guilty. There was this one guy who drove to its parents' cabin at 4 in the morning at,
Mhm.
and then you're like,
Right.
"Ooh, that was weird." And then it makes you realize, kind of like that Tinder example, how in hindsight, everything could look shady if you look at it through a
Yes.
different lens.
Yes.
100%. So on the program, we've had a guy named Scott Roeder, who's an evidence specialist. He has a company called the Evidence Room. He's fantastic. And then we've had a lot of, as recently as just the last episode, Dr. Monty Miller, who's a forensic uh, a, a forensic expert. Megan, can you talk a little bit about the difference between forensic science and evidence analyzation? Because sometimes people think that they are one and the same.
I think they also think that criminology, I think the bigger point is I think criminology and criminal justice are one and the same with forensic science. So when people found out that Coburger was a criminology student, has been a lot of discussion that, he's studying how to commit a crime. That's not exactly the same thing. So forensic science, you're actually analyzing. You do look at data. You do look at science. So if you were taking classes in sciences and forensic science, you might learn how to match fingerprints. You might learn a little bit about ballistics. Whereas if you're studying criminology and criminal justice, you're learning about the theories, what causes people to commit crime, and you're also learning about the system. So you're going to learn about criminal justice system, and you will learn about forensic science techniques and how they're evaluated and how reliable they are. But you're evaluating, you're not learning the practical nature, and you're not learning how to actually do that. So that's a difference. When we're talking about the sciences, that's a practical thing. That's a doing. We don't actually do that kind of work. So if you said he was maybe studying like that survey that he had put out, which we could discuss if you want, which had asked offenders to identify their feelings at certain points. You might be able to say then, yes, he's studying criminology in terms of, how offenders feel. How do you explain these crimes? That fits more with criminology than it does with, the technical. So he was learning almost the mindset or studying the mindset, the attitudes, which is a part of learning theory that we look at in criminology.
And that was a questionnaire he put together while he was studying with Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who wrote the book on BTK, which is why some people have associated BCK with BTK. Now I'll get yelled at for using that moniker. But back to that survey, Amy, I'm curious, was he fishing for ways to effectively kill?
I thought a lot about this, and it's a chicken or the egg situation because it's possible that he went into criminology and then started getting these ideas, these violent thoughts. And it's also possible that he was already having these violent thoughts and then sought out criminology. There's really no way to know. I know that was very interesting to people, that survey, and people, were quick to jump on that and say like, oh, he was clearly using this as a way to prep himself to commit a crime. I'm not sure that I believe that. It is definitely coincidental, but I don't know that that's what. I'm not sure if he put that survey out as a way to, gather intel for his crimes, or if when he got the responses, it sparked some sort of interest in him. There's really no way to know. But I can tell you that's a very common methodology that criminologists use is surveying people who have committed crimes. So that's definitely in line with what a criminology student would be studying and the correct method.
And now our audience has seen firsthand why we dub ourselves as having the best guests in true crime. You're listening to Amy and Megan. This is a really fascinating conversation. But we also have the best audience, STS Nation. And they're smart and they send in questions. And I want to just run some by you. This is actually a tweet that I caught today from Saluthy Ducey, who I follow. And it caught my attention. She writes, I'm curious why Bryan Kohberger's father mentioned the SWAT incident at Washington State University, but didn't mention at all the 4 students who were brutally slaughtered in their beds by an animal, meaning the killer, that hadn't yet been caught. Amy, I'll put you on the spot. What did you make in the very little that we saw about this relationship between father and son? And do you think that the father had to have known about this bolo for this white car that he was sitting in?
I don't know. I try to, I try not to judge things that I don't have enough information on. I think perhaps bringing up that shooting, if I might be incorrect with my timeline, but the shooting in Pullman that he was referencing had happened more recently to that time that he got pulled over. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay,
And
so
there was some chatter that the person who was ultimately, I believe, killed in that incident had some correlation to the crime, which was obviously never proven to be true.
So, I don't think it's strange that if you're talking to a law enforcement officer and you're making small talk, you're talking about a crime that occurred from the area in which you're driving from. I don't think that is necessarily strange for him to bring that up over the Idaho murders. Let's assume that he knows nothing about what his son might have done. I still don't think I think it makes sense that he's going to bring up the shooting more so than the Idaho case. Now, if he did know that his son was potentially involved, then that's a whole other story. And then I think there's more reason to analyze it.
The next comment comes from T. Marie. I feel like Bryan would have planned and maybe even put things over his seats. We had a DNA expert on yesterday, so it's in response to this. I'm really worried. I pray that they have enough evidence so he didn't slide through the cracks. Megan, I know you're not a forensic scientist, but the doctor we had on yesterday basically said they're going to rip that car apart, and if he had evidence taken from the scene, it will be in that car. Do you agree with that?
100%. They are going to scour that car. They're going to tear every inch apart. I have to tell you, if he was as sloppy in his car as he was seemingly at the crime scene, I'm almost certain they're going to find some evidence in that car. I feel pretty confident about it.
Amy, this one comes from Chris Elson. And he writes, he is pinned to the wall, the sheath, the car, the eyewitness, and I bet they have plenty more that are holding back until the discovery process. Is it ever case closed before you even go to trial?
Never. I mean, look at Casey Anthony, look at O.J. Simpson. There's many cases in which people were very sure that it was a slam dunk, for the prosecution, and then everyone was surprised to see that it was not. So I don't think we can ever say case closed. There's been many cases where there's been a hell of a lot more evidence than we have here. And again, we don't know the half of it, but just based on what we know, it's already a pretty strong case just for the little bit that we've seen so far. But anything could happen. There could be a procedural error. There could be, and, even if he's found guilty, he could still appeal. And, there's many things that could happen still.
The jersey's coming out. She used the word hell. I love it. I love it. By the way, I bought them for my daughters, and I make them wear two. They each have a shirt that says Jersey Girls.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, and they love it. In pink with white lettering. C1111 writes, thank you so much for touching on the topic of secondary and indirect victims. Seems like a lot of people online literally do not understand this concept, and it comes across as very infantile behavior. Megan, I think they're talking, about DM and the on-again, off-again boyfriend. But I just want to point out, too, that we don't know what Coburger's family knew or doesn't know, but we've got to assume that they were as surprised by this as anyone else. And if that's the case, they are suffering right now too, correct?
Yeah, I would point that out. When you had asked about his father before, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt right now and assume that he did not know what his son had potentially done. And I'd assume that the rest of his family did not know as well. And unfortunately, they are going to also be, scrutinized, and everyone's going to be, well, not everyone, but there will be a number of people who will blame them, who will say they knew more, their family, their life as they know it is also going to be torn apart. I realized that it was a couple days into the investigation when they publicly named his sisters and where they live or what they do. And I went, the lives of these families are really going to, you sympathize with the victims' families 100%, but their lives are going to be destroyed as well in many ways. This is kind of irreparable harm. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that there's so many secondary victims in this case.
Amy, this comment comes from Lourdes GZZ. I'll take two more comments and then we'll get some closing thoughts. And this is pure speculation here, so I want to emphasize that. This person writes, did he ever have military training? I keep wondering how he managed to fend off Ethan without getting badly hurt and without Ethan yelling something. Have you thought about this? I mean, Ethan was apparently a pretty decent-sized guy. I'm sure it's crossed your mind, but obviously we'd be speculating. Just curious if you've even run it by you in your head.
Regardless of Ethan's size, he was faced with a weapon, and more so, he was probably, I heard he could have possibly been sleeping. Whether or not he was sleeping, he was definitely caught off guard. Again, going back to the way people react in traumatic situations, people, we have fight, we have flight, we have freeze. There's other options. And just because someone's a bigger, person doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily fight. They too can freeze. So, who knows?
We're talking about a very long knife here as well. I just want to point that out. A very big knife. I think, a weapon. You're talking about someone who's vulnerable. They are in bed. They might be sleeping. There's vulnerability here. Sorry, that I don't know if everyone realizes that. Also, I don't think we yet know the order in which the victims were killed. It's really hard. There's so many variables at play at that question.
100%. Without getting too gruesome, I've had a Navy SEAL on and other people who were in the military, and they talk about killing, and also not just the, one-dimensional thought that we have in our head, which is visual, but the three-dimensional experience, the smell, the fluids running from the body, and all these things create a very chaotic situation. And again, I mean, there's no way we could ever judge, how Ethan would have reacted to this. But again, he was definitely had the wall against him with that huge weapon coming at him. This last comment comes from Stephen Melton. Another great show. I think the suspect had been in the house before, possibly when no one was home to scope it out. Again, this is mere speculation, but Megan, I'll put that one on you. They know forensically that, he'd been in the area quite a few times. You think he had the audacity to be inside of that home at some point?
I think it's a distinct possibility. He had visited approximately 12 times, and I'm sure the majority, if not all of those times, were from the outside, observing what he could, getting the layout. But I think there's also a very real possibility that he did enter the home at least once to try to gain some familiarity with it as well.
Wow. And we will, Amy?
Sorry, if I could just add to that. I also think it's possible that he was scoping it out from the outside, when it was dark out and lights were on inside. So he was, the way it was on a hill, there's different vantage points. So he could have also had an idea of his way around the layout of the house and who possibly was sleeping where, just from observing from the outside as well.
Sure.
Megan Sachs is a full professor of criminology and the graduate program director at Fairleigh Dickinson University in the great state of New Jersey. She also, along with Amy, co-hosts not one, but two podcasts, Women in Crime and Direct Appeal. Megan, your final thoughts on this fantastic evening and this great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, for having us on. As I said earlier, I think it's okay for everyone to be curious about the case. But I hope everyone treats it, respectfully and try to come at it without a rush to judgment in the way that I'm trying not to. It's very easy to rush to judgment, but there's so many variables and so much in this case that is still unknown to us. So I think you have to, take it one step at a time, instead of rushing. And again, whatever your discussion is, just be mindful of the fact that there are a lot of victims in this case. Aside from the the four young people who were murdered. So, just try to keep that in mind. And I think just handle it respectfully, as you would hope someone would handle it if it was your family or friends.
Listen to that advice. And then we've got Dr. Amy Schultzberg. She has a master's degree in forensic psychology and a Ph.D. in criminal justice. She's currently department chair and associate professor of criminology at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And she also hosts Women in Crime and Direct Appeal. And what is your direct appeal to the audience for your closing remarks, Amy?
All right, as usual, Megan somewhat took the words out of my mouth. Because her and I talk about this stuff all the time, and just the importance of treating this with respect. And it's become such a spectacle, this case. And again, the focus on the survivors, on the secondary victims of, Bryan Coburger's family. I don't think we could stress enough that just stop with the gossip, stop with the web sleuthing, and just be respectful. And, I might get some hate for this, but even the suspect, he's innocent until proven guilty. And I think people need to remember that as well. There does seem to be a very strong case against him. But again, he deserves his day in court the way every other suspect in our country does. So.
And you will have his day in court on Thursday at 8:30 in the morning. I am representing New Jersey. I've got my hat from my hometown, my Jersey flag. So send well wishes to the Garden State. A quick programming note. I'm doing double duty right now. We're also covering the missing woman out of Cohasset, Massachusetts, Anna Walsh. Obviously a very sad story that we hope does not have a tragic ending, but it appears like it might. So please follow us along for that story as well. And we'll be back soon enough with another episode of Surviving the Survivor. Love you, America.